This surveillance footage looks like nothing out of the ordinary, but in reality, it was recorded just hours before Kerry Owen's death. On the morning of May 27, 2022, a man was walking his dog along a quiet country lane in Worcestershire, England. It was just before 6 a.m., the kind of morning where nothing is supposed to happen. Then his dog stopped at a pile of leaves. Underneath, blood. The man looked closer and saw an arm, a leg, a body, shoved into a ditch and covered with vegetation. He called 999. When police arrived, their first assumption was a hit and run. A woman in her 30s, struck by a car on a dark rural road, left to die. Tragic, but straightforward. Except nothing about this case was straightforward. This is the story of Kerry Owen. 10 miles south of Birmingham sits the village of Hopwood. Country lanes, a canal, a couple of nice pubs, neighbors who look out for each other. Not much traffic, not much crime, not much of anything really. So when word spread that a body had been found on Wast Hills Lane, the whole village was shaken. People walked that lane all the time, to get to the canal, to take the dog out, just to stretch their legs. The idea that someone had died there, violently, in the middle of the night, it didn't fit, it didn't belong. But it happened. Detective Chief Inspector Gerry Smith of West Mercia Police was assigned to lead the investigation. When he arrived at Wast Hills Lane, his team was still operating under the assumption that this might be a fatal hit and run. But Detective Smith started noticing things that didn't add up almost immediately. First, the blood. There was a large pool of it in the road, but there were also drag marks, bloody drag marks leading from that pool, across the road, to the ditch where the body had been placed. Someone had physically dragged this woman off the road and dumped her there. Then they'd covered her with leaves, debris, and vegetation. Now ask yourself, does that sound like a hit and run to you? A driver panics, flees the scene, sure, that happens. But a driver who stops, drags the victim off the road, places her in a ditch, and takes the time to cover the body with whatever they can find. That's not panic, that's concealment. Detective Smith noticed something else. There were no tire marks, no vehicle debris, no broken headlight glass, no paint chips, no fragments of plastic. Nothing you'd expect to find at the scene of a high-speed collision with a pedestrian. This wasn't a hit and run. Detective was almost certain of it, but he needed more. While police were still processing the scene, Kerry Owen's family, hundreds of miles away in Peterborough, were getting the worst phone call of their lives. But it wasn't coming from police, it was coming from Kerry's boyfriend. Alan Edney called Kerry's family on May 27th and told them that Kerry had died in a hit and run. He said they'd been out camping together and Kerry had run off. According to his story, they were running across a farmer's field, went through a gateway, and he slipped. When he looked up, Kerry was lying on the ground with a hole in her head. He said he saw a black Peugeot 206 driving away in the distance. He told them he'd called the police and an ambulance. He said he'd gone to the hospital with Kerry, where she was pronounced dead. He even claimed that a police officer had taken his statement and dropped him back home afterward. Kerry's family was devastated. Her son got the call and had to process the fact that his mother was gone. But even in the middle of that grief, something felt off. One family member noticed how calm Edney seemed. Too calm. If your girlfriend had just been killed right in front of you, hit by a car and left to die, wouldn't you be destroyed? Wouldn't you be hysterical? Edney wasn't. He was collected, almost rehearsed. And then there were the details of his story that just didn't hold together. Someone who knew Kerry well said it plainly. Kerry doesn't do camping. It wasn't her thing. That detail alone raised eyebrows. And the car, a black Peugeot 206. One family member who'd spent years buying and selling cars said he hadn't seen a black Peugeot 206 in years, called it a collector's car, meaning it was an oddly specific detail about an oddly rare vehicle. But at that point, the family had no reason to suspect anything beyond what they'd been told. Their loved one was dead. They were grieving, and the man who claimed to have been right there when it happened was telling them exactly what happened, or so they thought. Let me tell you about Kerry Owen. Kerry was 35 years old. She was originally from Peterborough, and she was a mother of 5 children. 5. That's what makes this case cut so deep. 5 kids who lost their mom. Kerry was described by people who knew her as kind-hearted, someone who'd do anything for anybody. She helped raise her nephew, buying him clothes, feeding him, always being there. People loved her, but Kerry had a vulnerability when it came to relationships. The people closest to her knew it. All Kerry wanted in life was to be loved. That's how one family member put it. And when someone told her they loved her, she was all in, immediately. No hesitation, that openness, that desire for connection. It made her generous and warm, but it also made her a target. In March 2020, Kerry met a man on a dating site. His name was Alan Edney, and he was from Birmingham. Within 1 week, Kerry had moved to Birmingham to be with him. Her family met him early on. They went down to Birmingham, met Edney in the town center. He seemed lovely, charming, polite, the kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about. Kerry told her family she'd met the man of her dreams. They tried to convince her to come back to Peterborough, to stay close to family. She refused. She was in love, but barely a month into the relationship, the phone calls started. Kerry called her family and told them Edney was beating her. Her family begged her to come home, come back to Peterborough, go to her dad's place, go anywhere, just get away from him. But Kerry stayed. That's the brutal reality of domestic violence. It's never as simple as just leaving. The people on the outside can see it clearly, but the person inside the situation is trapped in ways that go beyond physical walls. For a while, Kerry stayed in contact with her family. Then, suddenly, the phone calls stopped. Facebook went silent. Text messages went unanswered. Her family kept reaching out, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Nothing came back. They were terrified. Then, out of nowhere, Kerry texted, "He's in prison." In 2021, Alan Edney, Kerry, and Edney's own mother had taken a short trip to Blackpool. It ended with Edney assaulting both Kerry and his mother. Kerry FaceTimed a family member afterward. She had grazes, a black eye. She told them she'd been to the hospital. He'd stamped on her stomach. And here's the detail that makes this even worse. Kerry was pregnant at the time. She was carrying Edney's baby, and he stamped on her stomach. Think about what kind of person does that. Not just assaulting your partner, but assaulting your pregnant partner, and assaulting your own mother in the same incident. Edney was arrested and sentenced to 6 months in prison for the assaults. 6 months. That's it. While he was locked up, Kerry reconnected with her family. It was like they'd gotten her back. The phone calls resumed, the contact came back. Her family felt relief. Maybe this was the end of it. Maybe Kerry was finally free. But when Edney got out, he went straight back to Kerry. They moved in together again. He assaulted her again. He was placed on bail with conditions not to contact her. And yet, somehow, they were still together. Because that's how the cycle works. And the system, the courts, the bail conditions, the short sentences, the system failed to break that cycle. Back in Hopwood, the detective team is methodically pulling apart the hit-and-run theory, and it's falling apart fast. They checked CCTV from nearby houses. One camera had captured a vehicle leaving Wast Hills Lane at around 4 a.m. The team tracked it down. It belonged to a local resident heading to work. They found the car, inspected it. No damage, no blood, nothing consistent with hitting a person. Dead end. That car wasn't involved, but the CCTV gave them something else, something much more important. One camera from a nearby property was pointed toward the area of the lane where the body was found. It didn't capture the scene directly, but it captured audio. And what was on that audio changed everything. At approximately 4:05 a.m. on May 27th, the audio captured two voices. According to investigators who reviewed the footage, the conversation quickly turned to distress. Then the distress escalated into screaming, prolonged, desperate screaming. What followed were unmistakable sounds of a sustained violent attack lasting several minutes, and then silence. But here's the part that made investigators' blood run cold. There was a gap in the screaming. It stopped, then started again. Two separate bursts of violence with a pause in between. Investigators believed this indicated two separate attacks at two different locations, and the physical evidence backed that up. About 40 meters before the spot where Kerry's body was found, officers conducting a fingertip search discovered blood on the ground. They also found a tooth, knocked clean out, and pieces of an orange object that officers initially thought was a cigarette lighter. So the picture became clear. Kerry had been attacked in one spot, then either moved herself or was dragged to a second location where the assault continued until she was dead. The pathologist's findings confirmed what the audio and the scene had already suggested. Kerry had been subjected to what was described as a savage beating. Over 80 injuries across her body, fractures to her nose, a tooth knocked out, the same tooth found 40 meters up the road, a fractured hyoid bone in her neck, which is one of the clearest indicators of strangulation. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. Kerry had been beaten to death. Her family was told they probably shouldn't view the body. One family member went anyway and couldn't recognize her. The injuries Kerry had sustained were so severe that her appearance had been changed beyond recognition. Police now knew they weren't dealing with a hit and run. They were dealing with a homicide, and they had a prime suspect. About 50 minutes after the audio captured the attack, CCTV picked up a figure walking away from the area of Wast Hills Lane. A man, alone, wearing a distinctive t-shirt. The same t-shirt visible in photos on Kerry's phone from the campsite earlier that evening. He was wiping his hands. He looked agitated, erratic. He walked down the lane and turned off. Alan Edney. Meanwhile, everything Edney had told Kerry's family was falling apart. He claimed he'd called the police and an ambulance. Police found no record of any such call. He claimed Kerry had been taken to a hospital. No hospital had any record of admitting her. He claimed a police officer had taken his statement. That never happened either. Every single detail of his story was a lie, fabricated from start to finish. An elaborate construction designed to point everyone, Kerry's family, eventually the police, away from what really happened. And there was one more thing. Kerry's phone contained photos that confirmed the couple had indeed been camping in woods near Wast Hills Lane. Officers found the campsite, a makeshift shelter, stacked wood, the remains of a large fire. Photos on Kerry's phone showed Edney at the campsite with a big fire going. Evidence suggested he'd consumed a significant amount of alcohol that night. The CCTV timeline showed that Kerry and Edney had set up the camp during the day, then gone back to Edney's grandmother's house on the nearby Hawksley estate for a meal. Around 10 p.m., they headed back to the campsite. They spent roughly 3.5 to 4 hours there. Then, for reasons unknown, they left the campsite in the early hours of the morning and walked down Wast Hills Lane. And that's when the screaming started. The investigation team had seen enough. They identified Edney's location, his grandmother's address on the Hawksley estate, within walking distance of the crime scene. Officers went to the address on the evening of May 27th. Edney was there. He was arrested on suspicion of murder. His family was completely blindsided. They still believed Kerry had died in a car accident. They had no idea. When police searched the house, they found something critical. In the kitchen, behind a cupboard, stuffed in a bin bag, the clothes Edney had been wearing that night. The distinctive t-shirt, tracksuit bottoms, trainers, the same items visible on CCTV footage and in Kerry's phone photos. The clothes had blood on them. DNA analysis confirmed it was Kerry Owen's blood. In the interview room, Edney gave police nothing. He went no comment to every question. But outside of formal questioning, he made remarks claiming he had an alibi and wasn't responsible. 3 days after his arrest, the Crown Prosecution Service charged Alan Edney with murder. When the news reached Kerry's family, one of them said it simply. It all made sense then. The lies, the different stories, the things that didn't add up, it all clicked into place. Now, I held off on telling you this part because I wanted you to understand the full picture of what happened to Kerry first. But Alan Edney didn't become violent on the night of May 26, 2022. He had been violent for years. And what investigators uncovered about his past paints a picture of a man who was a ticking time bomb. Beyond what he did to Kerry during their relationship, the beatings, the assault in Blackpool, the attack while she was pregnant, Edney had a documented history of serious domestic violence against multiple partners and even his own family members. Alcohol appeared to be a consistent trigger. But let's be clear, alcohol doesn't make someone beat a pregnant woman or try to kill a stranger. The violence was already inside him. The alcohol just took the leash off. one incident from Edney's past stands out. On New Year's Day 2018, more than 2 years before he even met Kerry, Edney was at a residence with his then-girlfriend. He had been drinking and became violent, attacking his girlfriend. A friend of the girlfriend came home from New Year's celebrations, heard screaming from inside, and went upstairs to check on her. When she entered the bedroom, she saw that Edney's girlfriend was in distress. Her face was bright red. Before the friend could react, Edney grabbed her, dragged her into the room, and turned his violence on her too. He threw her to the floor and began kicking and punching her. At the same time, he was strangling his girlfriend with a broom handle. At one point, the friend tried to escape, but in her panic ran toward the window instead of the door. Edney seized the opportunity and pushed her halfway out. She was dangling, looking down, seconds from falling. His girlfriend had to physically pull him back to save her friend from dropping. But even after that, Edney kept attacking, kicking her in the side, the stomach, the legs. When his girlfriend screamed that her friend was pregnant, Edney's response was, "I don't care. Another one can be dead then." He pleaded guilty to assault in March 2018 and was sentenced to 3.5 years. Under the standard rules of the English prison system, he would have been eligible for release after serving half of that sentence, meaning he was likely back on the streets by late 2019. After his release, the woman he attacked in 2018 posted warnings about Edney online. Kerry came across those warnings and reached out, not just to the woman, but also to her friend who had witnessed the attack firsthand. Both of them tried to warn Kerry about what Edney was capable of. They begged her to leave. Kerry stayed. She said she still loved him. And then she was dead. Alan Edney stood trial at Worcester Crown Court. The proceedings lasted 4 weeks. Now here's where Edney tried something. He didn't deny killing Kerry. He couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. The CCTV audio, the forensic evidence, the bloody clothes hidden in his grandmother's kitchen. There was no denying he was the one who did it. Instead, his defense team argued provocation and diminished responsibility. Edney claimed that on the night of the murder, Kerry had brought up the fact that he'd been abused as a child and that this had triggered him into a violent episode he couldn't control. Essentially, his argument was, "She provoked me, and I wasn't mentally capable of controlling my response." A psychiatrist evaluated Edney and did agree that he suffered from a mental abnormality, but the prosecution dismantled that defense piece by piece. They proved that Edney's mental condition did not contribute to his behavior that night. And the key evidence, his history, the previous assaults on Kerry, the attack on his mother, the 2018 incident, the pattern showed a man who repeatedly chose violence, sober, drunk, provoked, unprovoked. This wasn't a one-time psychological break. This was who he was. The prosecution also highlighted how Edney behaved after the killing. He didn't spiral into a breakdown. He didn't call for help. He calmly covered up the blood on the road. He methodically dragged Kerry's body into a ditch and concealed it with vegetation. He walked home, changed his clothes, hid them in a bin bag. Then he called Kerry's family and delivered a detailed, rehearsed lie about a hit and run. Does that sound like a man who lost control? Or does that sound like a man who knew exactly what he was doing? The jury clearly agreed with the prosecution. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of murder. Kerry's family erupted in the courtroom. They were jumping up and down, shouting. After months of anxiety, sleepless nights, not knowing whether this man would somehow walk free, it was over. But they also had to sit through some of the hardest moments imaginable during that trial. The CCTV audio, the one that captured Kerry's screams, was played in court. The judge warned the family beforehand and gave them the option to leave the room. Some stayed. One family member later said that the last time they ever heard Kerry's voice was on that recording, screaming for her life. They also learned something that hadn't been publicly known before the trial. The court was told that Edney was still kicking and beating Kerry after she was already dead. Throughout the proceedings, Edney showed zero remorse. He sat in the dock, giving family members evil looks. He laughed in one woman's face. No sadness, no regret, nothing. Alan Edney was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. 20 years minimum. That's what Kerry Owen's life was worth in the eyes of the law. Whether that's justice, I'll leave that for you to decide.